what if the massive labor strikes that are shutting down global tech giants right now,
Hmm.
what if they have absolutely nothing to do with hourly wages or benefits packages or, union leverage?
Right, which sounds crazy to say out loud.
Totally. But what if paying a disgruntled employee more money is actually like a profound spiritual failure?
And that right there is the incredibly provocative premise of the source material we are jumping into today. It's wild. It takes a really hard look at a specific labor dispute at Samsung Electronics, but then it just completely throws out the standard corporate spreadsheets.
Yeah, we are exploring a really radical framework here. It starts with just, corporate friction on a factory floor, but it rapidly expands into this sweeping treatise on leadership, the psychological definition of a worker, and literally a cosmic destiny.
Literal cosmic destiny, yeah.
Now, to be clear right up front, this source makes some massive, uncompromising claims. I mean, it touches on spiritual laws and even the emergence of a modern messiah.
Right. And our goal here is to act purely as an impartial mirror for you. We are going to unpack these concepts exactly as the source presents them.
Exactly.
The objective isn't to tell you what to believe, but to see how this entirely different lens kind of challenges our fundamental assumptions about work and human meaning, regardless of whether you personally adopt its ultimate spiritual conclusions.
Okay, so let's just dive in. Let's start with how this source views the people who actually run these massive corporate empires. It introduces a very specific taxonomy, I guess, of
Yeah.
the intellectual class.
It does. It divides them into two really distinct tracks.
Right. So on one side, you have your academic scholars.
Yeah.
And then on the other, you have your managers and business leaders.
And the text zeroes in heavily on how those business leaders actually accumulate their power over time.
Right.
Because a young leader, they learn from teachers in school, just like anyone else. And then they move into society, they learn from mentors.
Sure. Standard career progression.
But then when they are ready to violently expand their territory to, like, defeat competitors and build a true corporate empire, they require a very specific asset. The source calls this figure a strategist.
The strategist. And the text describes these strategists almost like tactical wizards. We aren't just talking about a guy with a marketing degree here.
No, not at all. A strategist reads the underlying rules of society. They anticipate competitors' moves, and they can metaphorically see what's moving underground.
Like they're playing 3D chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
Exactly. Their entire purpose is to spot threats, eliminate obstacles, and elevate their leader to immense power. And the source grounds this concept using a massive cultural touchstone.
Oh, right. The historical example.
Yeah, the dynamic between the ancient warlord Liu Bei and his brilliant strategist Zhuge Liang from the Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
Okay, yeah. For anyone unfamiliar with that, Zhuge Liang possessed just unparalleled tactical genius. He used it ruthlessly to build Liu Bei's power base from nothing.
He is like the ultimate strategist, but the text draws a really hard, non-negotiable line right here. It says Zhuge Liang was a strategist. He was not a teacher.
Okay, let's unpack this because this is so crucial. Why is that distinction the engine for this entire argument? Like, what actually happens when a massively powerful leader relies only on a strategist?
Well, eventually the empire just collapses under its own weight.
Really? Why?
The source explains this through a structural relationship. A strategist exists to serve the leader's ambition, right? Therefore, the strategist actually sits below the leader.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they provide the tactical how to defeat an enemy, how to corner a market, how to maximize profit. But to actually operate a massive society or a massive corporation brilliantly without it
You
imploding.
need something else.
Right, a leader needs to understand the why. And for that, they must find a teacher who inherently sits above them.
Okay, so if we look at it like building an invincible naval fleet, right? The strategist is the brilliant engineer making the engines run faster, maybe reinforcing the hull so pirates can't breach it.
That's a great way to put it.
But an invincible ship is completely useless if it's sailing in the wrong direction. You need a teacher like a navigator who actually knows which port the ship is supposed to sail to.
That captures the core mechanism perfectly. The strategist gives you the skill to build the machine. The teacher gives you the wisdom to direct it toward, well, human elevation.
Wisdom versus skill.
Exactly. And the text argues that the leaders sitting at the top of today's massive conglomerates, they have immense skill, but they are operating without a navigator.
They're just drifting.
Yeah, they have no teacher. They completely lack wisdom.
And that void of wisdom at the very top is exactly what trickles down and causes the crisis at the bottom. Which brings us to the labor disputes.
The factory floor friction.
Right. But the source doesn't just suggest, like, a tweak in HR management style here. It makes this sweeping, radical claim that the very concept of a laborer must be abolished entirely. It actually calls laborers modern-day slaves.
It does. It really doesn't hold back. Because the labor paradigm is entirely transactional. It's a system where a human being trades the finite hours of their life purely for financial survival.
Tit for tat, I give you time, you give me money.
Right. And the text argues that if you have a workforce conditioned by this transactional system, throwing more money at them doesn't fix the underlying spiritual rot.
Yeah, the text specifically mentions that if you pay a technician dozens of times more money, they don't suddenly find enlightenment on the assembly line.
No, of course not.
Because they view the job as a profound burden. They take that massive bonus and just want to go play or go to Hong Kong. The money just buys an escape hatch from the work.
Money basically acts as an anesthetic for the pain of meaningless work. But when the anesthetic wears off, the friction returns. So the text proposes a radical alternative.
Reclassification.
Yes. It states that every employee, starting at major conglomerates like Samsung, needs to be renamed and completely reclassified as a researcher.
Okay, I have to jump in here and push back on behalf of the listener because on the surface, this sounds like classic corporate semantics, right?
It sounds like an HR rebranding exercise.
Exactly. Is changing the title on an ID badge from laborer to researcher really going to stop a multi-billion-dollar labor strike?
Well, what's fascinating here is that it sounds like semantic trickery until you look at the psychological mechanism the source is outlining.
Okay, break that down.
Think about it. A laborer is someone who is given a task and a quota. Their relationship to the work is purely obligated. They are just, trying to get to 5 o'clock.
Clock watching.
Right. A researcher, however, owns the process. A researcher is driven by curiosity and the mandate to explore, improve, and innovate.
So it's a completely different posture.
Exactly. When you shift the culture to genuinely treat people as researchers, giving them autonomy, respect, and resources to solve problems, rather than just pulling levers, their relationship to effort changes.
Because the work is suddenly engaging their intellect, not just extracting their time.
Precisely. They don't look for the exit because they are intrinsically motivated. And if everyone in the building is actively researching how to improve the product and the culture, the adversarial dynamic just vanishes.
Right. A traditional labor union inherently stops making sense if everyone is a respected researcher solving a shared puzzle, rather than, an exploited laborer fighting against management.
It changes the whole game.
And the text delivers a severe warning for companies that refuse to make this shift. It says that if conglomerates continue to exploit people as mere laborers, heaven will dismantle them.
That's a heavy quote.
It really is. It views labor disputes not as union negotiations, but as cosmic penalties. It says workers on a picket line are essentially demanding compensation for being kept ignorant.
Wow. That is a brutal and profound reframing of industrial action.
Compensation for being kept ignorant.
It completely shifts a strike from, you aren't paying me enough for my time, to, you failed to provide an environment where I could grow.
Right. You kept me in the dark as a mere cog in a machine, and now I am extracting a financial penalty for my spiritual stagnation.
That changes how you look at every picket line on the news, doesn't it?
It totally does. But it raises a huge question. Why is this blowing up right now? I mean, the transactional labor system has been the norm since the Industrial Revolution. Why is the source acting like this is an immediate existential crisis for today's tech giants?
Right, why now? To explain the urgency, the source zooms out to a macro historical timeline. It outlines a strict 3-generation life cycle for massive corporations.
Okay, walk me through the generations.
So, Generation 1 consists of the founders. They endure immense hardship to lay the raw foundation of the company. Then, Generation 2 takes that foundation and uses those brilliant, ruthless strategists we talked about earlier to defeat competitors and expand into a global empire.
Which means today's leaders, the ones currently facing these unprecedented strikes, are Generation 3.
They are. The 3rd-generation leaders inherit a colossal, globally dominant machine, but their mandate is completely different from the first 2 generations.
How so?
Their job is not to build the empire or aggressively expand it. Their mandate is to operate it brilliantly for the benefit of humanity.
Wait, If the first two generations had it all figured out with their work ethic and their strategists,
Yeah.
why is the third generation suddenly dropping the ball so spectacularly?
Because the tools that build an empire cannot sustain one.
Oh,
The third generation inherited the wealth and the strategists, but they never sought out a teacher. They're trying to solve deep spiritual and cultural problems with tactical business maneuvers.
and this is where the source makes its wildest leap. Like tying this modern corporate failure directly to a centuries-old philosophical destiny on the Korean Peninsula.
Yeah, the text suddenly introduces figures from the Joseon dynasty specifically, towering 16th century Neo-Confucian scholars named Yulguk and Tawigi.
And for anyone unfamiliar with Korean history, these were brilliant minds who essentially tried to architect a perfect, morally driven society based on deep philosophical principles.
Right. And the source claims that the entire historical purpose of the Joseon era was to elevate human philosophy. But according to the text, this grand philosophical project stalled. It hit a wall at exactly 70% completion.
Okay, let's break down that 70% concept because the source leans on it heavily. What does 70% completion actually mean when we're talking about the philosophical evolution of a society?
Well, think of building a society like building a house. You can pour the foundation, frame the walls, and put on the roof. You can establish the laws, build the roads, and create the economic engines. That gets you to 70%.
You've built the hardware.
Exactly, the hardware. But to reach 100% to turn that house into a home, you need the final software update. You need the ultimate spiritual and philosophical understanding of how humans should live joyfully together.
And the source is saying the Joseon dynasty built the incredible hardware, but failed to produce that final 30% of wisdom.
Yes.
So how on earth does a stalled 16th century philosophical project connect to modern microchip manufacturing at a company like Samsung? Like, what's the bridge there?
The text argues that the only reason these massive modern conglomerates were allowed to amass such unprecedented global power and wealth is so they could fund the completion of that remaining 30%.
Oh, wow.
In the eyes of the source, the corporate empire is not an end in itself. Hoarding wealth is not the goal. The multinational corporation is merely the infrastructure, the vehicle required to synthesize this completed philosophy and distribute it to all of humanity.
Making the conceptual leap from a factory floor dispute to a cosmic mandate to finish a 500-year-old philosophical destiny is dizzying.
It is a massive scale shift.
It completely reframes the nature of a modern CEO. If the third-generation leaders and their massive workforce of potential researchers desperately need a teacher to unlock this final 30% of wisdom, what does that figure actually look like in the modern world?
Well, the source offers a very harsh critique of what modern people think a savior or a teacher should be. We have been conditioned by a transactional mindset to view spirituality as basically a cosmic vending machine.
You put in a prayer, you get a luxury apartment.
Right. You put in a certain amount of devotion, and your kid miraculously gets accepted into Harvard.
And that's exactly the trap the text points out, isn't it? It states that people selfishly wait for a messiah who will act as a magical problem solver for their material greed.
Exactly. But the true teacher doesn't come to grant wishes or fix your failing business. The true teacher acts as a diagnostic mirror.
Meaning they show you the uncomfortable truth about why you are suffering in the first place.
Yes. Their role is to point out exactly how people are living incorrectly, guide them to genuinely recognize their ignorance, and show them the path to a joyful life. They address the root cause of human misery, rather than just treating the symptoms with material wealth.
And the aesthetic of this modern teacher is entirely stripped down. The text makes a sharp contrast with historical figures like Jesus or Siddhartha. In the modern era, the teacher doesn't need a gold crown or to travel by foot from village to village.
Because the infrastructure of the modern world has already been built by those massive corporations we were just talking about. Today, the teacher only needs plain clothes, a single desk, a camera, and the internet.
It's all digital.
Yeah. Through that camera, they can broadcast what the text calls the righteous law, or Zhengbub, globally and instantly.
Which brings us to the most direct claim of the text. The speaker of the source material explicitly positions themselves as this teacher for humanity.
They do.
But their methodology is fascinatingly detached. They aren't out there lobbying governments, starting a political party, or marching in the streets.
No, they claim their role is simply to sit at a desk, receive the world's most intractable, difficult questions from global leaders, and solve them through the fundamental laws of nature.
The text refers to modern corporate leaders and CEOs as tribal chiefs.
Tribal chiefs, right?
And it makes a really profound point about human psychology here. We look at these billionaires and assume they have it all figured out. But the text argues these tribal chiefs are secretly miserable.
Oh, totally.
They were at the absolute peak of the pyramid,
Ugh.
surrounded by endless resources, but they are drowning in spiritual debt. They're going crazy with frustration because they possess all the tactical skill in the world, but they don't actually know how to lead their people to true happiness.
In an age of total information overload where we have more data than at any point in human history, ultimate power isn't a miraculous supernatural event. It is simply clarity. The ability to sit at a desk and provide fundamental, undeniable answers to the exact anxieties that keep the world's most powerful people awake at night. If this modern teacher can heal the profound ignorance of the leaders at the top, that wisdom trickles down.
And then the leaders stop treating people like disposable laborers, the workers transform into empowered researchers, and the entire society heals.
That's the formula, according to the source.
Let's synthesize the journey we've just taken, because it's been a lot. We started by looking at the friction of a modern labor dispute, but the source forced us to dig much deeper, drawing a hard line between the tactical strategists who help build empires and the wise teachers required to actually navigate them.
Right, and then we explored the psychological mechanism of killing the laborer mindset, the modern-day slave trading time for money, and replacing it entirely with a dignified, curious researcher.
Then we traced the three-generation life cycle of massive corporations, recognizing the current crisis. Third-generation leaders are sitting on immense power, but lack the final 30% of philosophical wisdom needed to operate their empires for humanity's benefit.
And finally, we looked at the source's vision of a modern digital age teacher. Not a mystical wish granter, but a figure sitting at a simple desk, using the internet to broadcast clarity to a world drowning in confusion.
It's an incredibly comprehensive, challenging framework, but let's bring it all the way down from the cosmic level and back directly to you, the listener. How are you operating in your daily life?
Ask yourself, are you leaning entirely on the strategists in your career, like focusing purely on tactics, networking, and outmaneuvering your competitors? Or are you actively seeking a teacher, actively looking for a philosophy that gives your actions actual meaning? When you log into work tomorrow morning, are your hands tied to the mindset of a laborer, just watching the clock and waiting for the weekend? Or can you engage your environment as a researcher, taking ownership of the process and actively digging for deeper understanding?
It changes the entire geometry of how you view your career. And it leaves us with one final, lingering thought. This source looks at a massive, cutthroat tech conglomerate and sees a vehicle for human salvation.
It really does.
So I leave you with this. If the ultimate role of a giant company is not to hoard wealth, but to create an environment where humans actually learn how to live joyfully and with profound purpose, what happens to the global economy when the first major corporation actually figures out how to do that? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.